So it's my pleasure to introduce to you our second speaker, who will be familiar to some of you, Lauren Tilton. Just to remind you, Lauren Tilton is the E. Claiborne Robbins Professor of Liberal Arts and Digital Humanities at the University of Richmond. She specializes in computational approaches to studying 20th and 21st century visual culture. Her most recent co-authored books include Distant Viewing, Computational Exploration, and Digital Images, Humanities Data in R, second edition by Springer, and Computational Humanities. Her award-winning projects such as Photogrammar have received funding from the American Council of Learned Societies, the National Endowment for the Humanities, and Mellon. She is editor-in-chief of Computational Humanities, an open access journal with Cambridge University Press. She is president of the Association for Computers and the Humanities, the Scholarly Association for Digital Humanities in the United States, and president-elect of the Association of Digital Humanities Organization, the Global DH Association. She received her PhD in American Studies from Yale University. Please welcome Lauren Tilton.
Thank you all so much. I'm starting to lose my voice apparently, so I'm going to trudge through here. But I just want to give a huge shout out to Lindu. I've been a very small piece of watching her career blossom from the first day she took the workshop with us several years ago, and to see the amazing work she's doing and to trudge through that being sick, it's pretty incredible. But to see such a young and blossoming scholar in this setting like that is such an exciting and wonderful aspect to see. So I just want to give her an extra shout out again in case she can hear us. As well, like yesterday, I want to thank again the entire team here, Thierry and the entire team, including everyone who's been involved in catering and cleaning and all of those wonderful elements that make these events possible. So thank you again. So in case you're not sick of me yet, you have about 30 more minutes with me. Apologies in advance, but hopefully this slightly different angle from yesterday will be a little bit exciting and put some nice theory behind some of the work that we've been seeing today in the last few days. So today I'm going to talk about our theory of distant viewing. I'll do a little bit of a brief introduction quickly, like yesterday, for those who maybe weren't able to join, talk exactly what that theory and method means, then talk about some distant viewing approaches, and then some tools that maybe hopefully after you leave today, you too will go distant viewing on our Distant Viewing Explorer on your computer and have some fun. So with the images of your choice. So maybe some Trevor Paglins, maybe some memes, GIFs, your images of choice, perhaps something more fun for given the deep problems of our moment, sometimes a little fun is what we need to keep going. So a little bit of an introduction again. I run this lab where we have these elements, and at the end I'm going to show you our Distant Viewing Explorer. And I just, again, want to give a shout out to Mellon, but particularly the National Endowment for the Humanities, our really key funder and government agency in the US, and the wonderful people who work there. A lot of the work you're going to see today is based on the book Distant Viewing. A lot of the work you're going to see is based on chapters that this work develops on from MIT, also open access. Wonderful to be here with another MIT author, Diana. And again, a shout out to Emily Pugh for a lovely review and CAA of both of our books together. So thank you for engaging in our work so closely. I think when you're among such wonderful scholars in one room, like everybody, it's such a delight to be there in person. Okay, so what do we mean by distant viewing? So we became really interested in this challenge of how exactly do computers see? How are they encoding images? We talk a lot in photography about how light's being encoded on paper or through digital sensors. But what exactly is computer vision? What is this technology that's designed around the idea of being able to see like a human? We all have computer vision in our lives. If you take your phone and take a photo, you have computer vision. When it makes that slight adjustment for the light, when it makes that box around your face, these are all elements of computer vision. Maybe you've had that wonderful new feature where you go and you say, I want to find all of my photos of dogs, or I want to find all of my photos of cats, or I want to find all of my photos of bottles, or whatever. That feature is all computer vision that's built into here. And we were interested in thinking about taking the apparatuses and the theories of visual culture, media studies, to actually theorize exactly what computer vision is doing. If computer vision is the technology, what is the socio-technical work? What is the theory that could ground that when we name it? So what we argue is that when we're using computer vision and large language models that go from text to image or image to text are also a form of computer vision, actually. We argue that that's a type of distant viewing. So how do we get to this idea of calling computer vision, calling the act of seeing through pixels, through the algorithms that we design, distant viewing? Okay, so my question is, and this is a fundamental question of visual culture, what is this an image of? You're probably processing that very quickly. You're like, have ideas. Turn to your neighbor for 1 second and give it a caption. Turn to your neighbor, give yourself a caption. What is this an image of? Okay. A guy on a horse. Okay. Okay, I hear lots of little elements, guy, horse, dog. Who's the dog? Yeah, okay, we got questions, okay. So we do this very, very quickly. And one of the things, though, is that we see it really fast, and that language often offers we do this really fast. And language often offers an explicit signs that correspond to objects primarily by convention. So we call it a horse or a dog or that. But as we know as media scholars, images make meaning differently than language. And so we like to draw on the work of Paul Valery, who says looking, in other words, forgetting the names of the things that one sees. We see and process it really fast, and then we go to find words. But if we want to offer an interpretation, though, we need to quickly in our minds draw on ways of seeing. Colors, shapes, lines, saying this is a dog, we do a content, right? And then we think of ways of viewing, ideas about land, animal, gender, power, right? These ways that are culturally shaping how we interpret the world. And we can think of scholars like Stuart Hall and others who've made us think about the ways in which the ways that we see and we view, going back to Berger as well, are shaped by visual cultures and we're socialized into those visions. And we do this incredibly quickly. But one of the challenges is, for a computer, this is a little bit more of an issue. So for a computer, we see this image, but it breaks down into a series of pixels that then gets turned into an array of numbers. That is actually what the computer is dealing with, is an array of numbers. It's often broken down on the RGB channel, red, green, blue, because that's human sight. It aligns with the ways our cones often work, assuming you're fully able-visioned. So it is a vision that is built on a sort of abled idea about that. And it breaks it down into these numbers. But then what a computer has to do is we put the digital image in and it gets broken down into pixels in the computer. But a computer actually, when we ask it this question, what is this an image of, it has to do it the other way. It gets this series of pixels. And when we say in computer vision, what is this an image of, it needs to figure out what that array of numbers is. So what is this an image of? Okay. So the more information we give, the more the computer vision algorithms can figure it out. I'm zooming out. It's getting more information. Any idea what this is? Okay. I'm going to keep zooming out. What is this an image of? Okay, we're back to our horse's eye. I gave you a little bit of a hint earlier. But without that hint, would you probably figure this, like, I don't know, it's an eye or something, and we zoom out. And so one of the challenges then is that not only do we have to put the pixels in context of each other in order to make meaning and actually figure out what it's actually seeing, that unlike words, if I give you a horse, every time the horse turns, or if I take a photo of a face, every time I shift my face, the pixel counts change. So you can't hard code this. There are trillions, there's endless amounts of ways to represent the same idea of a face or a horse through pixels. Because one slight shift of light, one slight micro movement changes the actual pixel counts. So what people have been doing for decades is trying to figure out how to turn those pixels, meaning into the semantic language of, and map on to concepts of viewing that we have in the human visual system. So as a part of that then is that we see that distant viewing is a theory of how the computational exploration of digital images through the application of computer vision works and why it is needed. So the mimetic nature of images necessitates that the computational analysis of digital images starts with the extraction of semantic metadata. In other words, we have to start to build a code system. Or, in the language of someone like Stuart Hall, we have to encode ways of seeing in order to decode those ways of seeing. The process of constructing those annotations becomes a way of viewing. So in other words, I am building an encoding system through computer vision. When I say I want to go find objects, faces, people, when I say I want to go find chairs, if I train the algorithm to go see in new ways, I'm actually training it in ways of seeing that I encode to then be decoded by the algorithms. So this process of encoding and decoding is not a neutral act. It's deeply steeped in ways of seeing and viewing. And we can think about the ways in which computer vision has often been driven by ways of seeing that are guided by the surveillance state. Many ways of seeing are about satellites. They're about the ways of detecting people. They're about also automation of processes like automating cars, automating workshop floors, automating industry. So many of the ways of seeing that are actually built aren't just cultural ways of seeing, they're economic ways of seeing and they're political ways of seeing that are built into these. And that none of this is neutral. And so, for example, you see this image on the right where what we then have to do when we go distant viewing is we have to figure out what elements of the image we want to pull out. What ways of seeing do we want to bring in, do we want to go looking for? So as we say, when you're using designing computer vision, we are engaging in the act of distant viewing. So that draws on all of the work of media studies. Maybe I should just make a note. I want to give a shout out to a bunch of scholars who we're deeply in conversation with, many of y'all who are here as well, but also people like Stuart Hall, Liz Losh, Tara McPherson, Joanna Zelenka, and Hallie Wickham, and them who have really led that call, and also Steve Anderson at USC, who have guided these conversations around, as Steve Anderson says, we need a theory for this, and we heeded his call. So we also turned this into a method. So one of our interests is in how do you operationalize some of this work, how do you do it at scale? So we drew on the work of the data science pipeline actually to think about how we, to turn distant viewing also into a method. One thing that's really key about visual data is in the traditional data science pipeline, you actually start at organize, because much of data comes already as text or numbers, like counting in science. But visual data has to have a pre-step. You have to do that encoding first. So much of the way we've actually even taught data science, if you're interested in this, doesn't even account for visual data. Much of the way we've even taught data science in those fields was predicated on the idea of text and numbers and wasn't actually dealing with images. So one of the things we want to do is pull that back to say why images are engaged with that. Okay, I'll pause for a second. And I'm going to go into 4 approaches by which we have engaged with distant viewing. Okay, I've got the lunch card. Y'all still with me? We're still good? Okay. Post-lunch, second talk, we're hanging in there. Okay, cool. Dark windowless, okay, cool. I'm glad you're still here. Excellent. Yeah. As I like to say in my class sometimes, like, does anyone need a stretch? You know, like, yeah, keep it going here. Okay, I'm going to walk through 4 elements. And one of this is going to start with some of the most famous photographs. So in the 1930s, we have some of the most famous photographs of the era, Dorothea Lange's My Your Mother, Rothstein's Arkansas, and we have these images that we see. And these are from a collection of actually 170,000 photographs known as the FSA. And we became interested in how do we view this archive past the same photos that you see every day, the same ones that have circulated through American textbooks. In fact, all of this work has made me really inspired on recirculation to go take like the top 20 FSA photos and go track their recirculation through like American textbooks and like websites, because these just like have become defining. But what happens when a federal agency employs over 40 photographers to go around the country and document the nation? What else did they document amid the Great Depression? What other ways were they interested in? Was it only about kind of the poverty and deprivation? And we could think of the work of someone like Kara Finnegan's work, Picturing Poverty, that it talks about that kind of element. And so how could we zoom out? How could we go distant viewing? So we wanted to take instead to look at the other 169,980 that people don't engage with as much. And we took a type of method called an image segmentation. And what this does is it moves beyond objects to called things and stuff. So things are things that you can count, like chairs, tables. Stuff is like a wall, a ceiling. And this algorithm becomes a really interesting proxy for foreground, background, and different ways of, and expands us past just the object counting space. And we became really interested in the bottom right, where the three photographers were kind of separating a bit from the others by looking at their, which photographs were outdoors, outside, and which photographs were people. And so the bottom right also turns out to be two of the four women photographers and the only photographer of color, Gordon Parks. Why were they more inside? What about their images made them more inside? And what was their focus on people? Again, this is a lot about environment, why are they inside? What's going on when they go inside? And what it did was help us look a little bit closer. When you start to look closer to their work compared to, say, the work of Walker Evans or Carl Meinen or Rothstein, you see that they go inside to see the lived experiences of people in cities. And so you could see that they went for more intimate spaces to see the more intimate side of segregation in DC and the world of women in boarding houses right outside Washington, DC. And their positionality, one could argue, shapes their gaze and the spaces that they have access to and their interests. And so it helped us to sort of see these photographers, what they were interested in from a new angle, particularly when compared to the rest. And also how they documented a side of the United States that was not always such a segregation in the service of a federal agency's mandate. The second thing another area we became interested in was by looking at scale, was how we could also zoom in another way. So one way you can actually use these models is to actually look at ground versus sky. And this actually becomes a proxy for composition and perspective, how much the camera's looking down or up on the element. So one of our things we are interested in is how do you take the logics of these algorithms and harness them or map them onto the analyses that animate how we study photography. And so what that helped us to see was to re-look at the work of Esther Bubbly. And one of the things that I hadn't noticed about her work until we did this was that when we actually used these algorithms to be a proxy for perspective, we started to see that Esther Bubbly almost always looked up to her subjects, up to the monumentality of Washington, D.C., up to the women she looked up to the women that she documented. Her camera was almost always tilted up in some way compared to other photographers. Her reverence and the monumentality becomes a part of her way of viewing in her work. So while we were doing this at scale, it actually allowed us to then zoom really closely and to really look at the photographs from a new angle. So that's some of the ways that this work has helped us to sort of shift how we were thinking about this collection, and this animates a chapter of the distant viewing book if you're interested in more. But we've also been interested in how these methods can animate public access to photographs as well. This is a project called Photogrammer. We took all the metadata along with the images. Anyone can go on this site if you want to see photographs from a specific place. And we became interested in how distant viewing, or particularly image embeddings, could help us to create recommender systems. And so this did two things for us. One, it's about to zoom in, and you're going to see that some of these photographs have no metadata in a second. There's no information about the photographer or even about the name you see over on the right there. So by doing this and using image embeddings, we were able to make accessible 40,000 photographs that have no metadata. There's no photographer, there's no date, there's nothing. And the image similarities also allows us to begin to see tropes and themes in the collection. So it's doing two things at once. And the invitation here is to keep moving. And you'll also see right here that strip of photographs there. This is not using AI, but since we've talked about materiality, we found some metadata records to recreate the strips, the negatives, of about 50,000 of the images. We recreated the strips digitally that you can find in the Library of Congress that no one is allowed access to. So because of the overscans and their counting, you can follow the line of sight of the photographers and the ways they bracketed and the decision makings they made. So we blended AI with the materiality and the challenges of metadata to bring those pieces together and to bring 40,000 photos together that you couldn't see before. The third way that we've been thinking about distant viewing is color. So one of the things that's a big challenge, as we've talked about materiality again, is color shift in images. So we've been working with a photograph of 17,000 photographs from the Documerica 16,000, which I talked about yesterday. This is a collection from the Environmental Protection Agency documenting America's horrible environmental position that we may be returning to. And these are the nicer photos. And what we wanted to do was think about how could we color correct. So in an effort to digitize, they digitized these photos, they digitized the color-shifted versions of the Kodachrome's images of the slide film. And so we actually went to the library, to National Archives. We went and digitized 50 originals. We found their color-shifted image, we took their color-shifted image, and then we found the manual for Kodachrome and how the color additive process, and designed a computer vision algorithm to recreate, to color shift all 16,000 photos closer to their original. And we did that, again, as a combination of taking the original, taking the color shift, and reading the manuals from Kodak to do this. And so we hope that while it's not perfect, if we're gonna start doing more computer vision on this work, it's a little bit closer and they approximate the actual image. The last part I'll focus on here is something some of y'all saw again yesterday, but just a little bit of a review, is moving to large language models, where we've also been thinking about how we can use these large language models to do this. So we went image to text. And one of the reasons we still argue that this is distant viewing is because that process of having the image go to text is still a matter of an algorithm deciding what to go viewing and seeing. But this time we have more control. We're actually telling it what to go looking for with those prompts. So the ways of vision we can now actually shape, and when we go asking to look for things, or maybe what we choose not these algorithms to go looking for. In this case, we took the 16,000 images, we created captions, and then we generated a bunch of themes from them. So this is an example of one here, which is smokestacks in Cleveland, Ohio. And we said, generate captions. Based on those captions, tell us who are the most similar photographs. And then we begin to give you the most similar photographs that tell you about, in this case, a series of images about air pollution in the United States, particularly around industry. And then we turn these into themes that you can see here. I mentioned yesterday seeing themes that we had not seen before. Other themes that really caught my attention, for example, was this example of number 26, which says child, young, boy, girl, moment, playground. And then 27, construction, industrial site, mining, workers. These are actually hierarchical, so which means that the relationship to the other caption matters. This is not like topic modeling where it's random. These are actually have a relationship based on doing embedding a large embedding space of these images. And what that, for example, has, and I'm working on a book project about this, is it brought my attention to an entire set of photographs where photographers made the decision as a rhetorical move is to have children playing, like football or basketball, in the foreground, and in the background to have this mills spewing smoke or pollution, a plane putting pollutants in the ground. And so that combination of number 26 of child, young, boy, girl, and construction, industrial, site, mining, those are actually, shows you to put those two major aspects in this decision making that they're using in order to convey the needs for these environmental laws of the 70s. This is a little bit of that project I mentioned. This is Digital Documerica. You're welcome to go to the site, digitaldocumerica.org, and we've been putting all these elements up there if you want to explore more. So last piece I will talk about then is a bit more about method. So I mentioned earlier about the theory of distant viewing, this method that we have here. And one of the things that we're always really interested in is accessibility, and for others to be able to try out these methods if you're interested, and to also understand when models are working and when they're not. So we have this new project we just launched called the Distant Viewing Explorer with funding from the Mellon Foundation. And what you can now do is go test out on images of your own or ones that we've provided, and you can try out all these different models and see how they're working. So I showed you image segmentation already. I showed you, those of you who were there yesterday, for SIGLIP, zero-shot models on the bottom down here. And you can then, in colors up there, and you can try these out on your collection of choice. So to give you an example here, you can load in the model, you can try it out, you can download your outputs as well, and you can start to see what's under the hood of these technologies, where their limits are, how they're working, and maybe you're just interested in the models themselves, maybe you're interested in using distant viewing to go explore a collection of your choice, but this is a sort of combination of data sort of making more accessible these technologies so we can all better understand how they're really working and their limits, the ways they're seeing, the ways they're not, the ways they're viewing, and the ways they are not. So if you've used this and you find it helpful, please do let us know. We do not do data tracking on our sites. That's a decision. So it's always great to hear from people if you use it, if it's interesting to you. It also helps us get more funding, which, never hurts. And, hopefully you'll also have an opportunity to go distant viewing. So thank you. Okay.
All right. Questions for Lauren? See one in the back.
I have a pedestrian question to ask you. I have a lot of photographs, like a lot of people do, and I have a lot of duplicate files. What would you do to work on that, like with computer vision?
Sure. Do you want to keep both files, or do you want to you want to remove one?
Probably remove them because I have about 800,000 photos.
There are increasingly tools that are built into a lot of the like Apple Photos in them that will do that for you now. So you could do it that way. Another is there's some code. If you Google that online, there's some new Python code and elements to do that as well. So there are ways to do that. If one thing you want to be really careful with that is file names, because those of you who maybe have used a phone and then a camera and then this, you might end up with the file names being the same, even though they're not the same. So one thing to watch out for these is because sometimes being really careful about that becomes really, really key. So if you find me after, and also I'm happy if you give me your info, I can Google some. I don't mean to be facetious when I say Googling, actually. I think one of the challenges of searching for something is knowing how to find the right thing and what you're looking for. So I would be happy to help you with that. Yeah, totally. Yeah, no, we've all been there. Trust me. I don't know about you, but I may not be a pack rat at my house, but I'm a data pack rat. So I totally understand. I'm a data hoarder might actually be a better way of putting it.
Other questions?
Thank you. I looked around to make sure I wasn't hogging the question period. Thank you so much for the FSA documentation and exploration. I love it, and I'll definitely have a look at it. One of the most interesting things, as an example of how it helps to read and study photographs, it was fascinating to see the chart where you have some people at the bottom that are mostly photographing people, and Walker Evans is the outlier.
Yes, yeah, Walker.
And he has often been described as part of the great humanistic tradition of the Depression, and in fact, and I think this was putting all of the characteristics of James Agee onto Evans. In fact, he didn't like people based on all the research that I've done, and particularly women. And in fact, he made an important contribution to photography, but certainly not to humanism. And I think there you show it in a way that I had never seen before. So I think it is a real tribute to the value of these kinds of databases.
Thanks.
And just one joke. When I was looking at your picture of the guy on a horse with a dog, the other thing that came to mind immediately was I thought Marlborough Man wannabe, mostly because of the landscape in the back.
Yeah.
So just an example of how this one image evokes all the other images we've seen.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh man, I got myself in so much trouble in grad school because, as I mentioned, I was at Yale and Walker Evans taught there. And I came in furious with Walker Evans because I had to read Let Us Now Praise Famous Men like 4 times in undergraduate, which no one should have to do. If you haven't read Let Us Now Praise Famous Men, and you're into documentary, some people love it. There's a debate about Southern life, and I can't stand Walker Evans. And that is something that you're not allowed to say, but I'm gonna say it here. I cannot stand Walker Evans. So I am so glad you said that. Yes, we found each other finally. I'm gonna be banned from everything now, but yes.
Thank you so much for that great talk. I was thinking about distant viewing is, I think you acknowledge the connection with distant reading, like Montgomery's distant reading in the digital humanities, which was a deliberate provocation to, like, in opposition to close reading. Yeah. So I wonder if importing that over to visual analysis, how you see that dynamic between, like, distant viewing versus close reading of a photograph, because your presentation did really well at zooming in and out. Like, we go from those beautiful mapping structures into the actual photograph. So I'd love to hear you talk more about that.
Yeah, we grappled with the term, and we ended up with distant viewing, in part because the distant reading community had changed what it meant by distant reading. But the author who initially came up with that term has still remained the sort of defining person, even though people like Ted Underwood and Melanie Walsh and Matt Yockers and everyone else have, like, tried to change the term to not be so, like, specific to it. But because it has, like, salient still in the digital humanities community, it was, like, became a term that we thought still worked. Now, we also use distance a little differently. We meant, part of the reason we also kept distant was because it was the distance of the eye from the pixel and seeing. We relinquish our eye when we let computers see. The computer becomes the eye for us. So our distance is also from our physical eye to the algorithms that do that and go churning over those pixel numbers. So that's also what we were thinking about, is the distance from our own ocular space as well. We couldn't come up with a better term. That's at the end of the day also, but at least it wasn't made the conversation clearer. So, thanks. Yeah, I wish we could, the specter of a certain version of distant reading continues to be a challenge, I think. But I think distant reading has moved on too as well. So I'm hoping the term still has legs in a different way. Yeah. It's a great question.
So I saw the distant viewing lab, and I was wondering if you have a sort of maintained library that you sort of update with new methods, with different AI models for each of the categories in the lab.
Yeah. So we have the site. We put a bunch of stuff on GitHub, and the distant viewing toolkit that we've also built has custom algorithms built inside of it. So we do update all that on GitHub and with new papers, and we try to always publish like the models and what we build through like Journal of Open Source Software and all those elements. So we do try to keep that updated on GitHub. So if anyone's a GitHubber, is that a term? I don't know. You know what I mean? What is a GitHub person? I get. So GitHub is a digital site that you can put all of your code onto and share the code with other people. Think of it as like a digital library, but for software and code that people can exchange and share. So GitHub's the home of a lot of models and code. So, yeah. So that's our main spot right now. So we try to make everything open source and open access as possible. That is our general philosophy. So to the degree that we can. It's also one of the reasons why we primarily work with government photography. It's because of US copyright law. It's really hard for anyone in the United States to work with anything after 27, and we're really subject to really intense copyright laws. So, if you have strategies for that, let me know. Capitalism, woo woo.
Thank you. Is all the Dorothea Lange stuff, 30 stuff, non-copyright, and they can grab it and do something weird with it?
So,
Not too weird.
No, I mean, you're welcome. Yeah. A lot of it's not copyrighted because a lot of it was taken under her when she was at the FSA. She did keep a bunch of negatives and work on her own that she kept in her own personal collection, and those are subject to her estate and family. The other part is that she has a series of photos that are impounded that were a series taken in Japanese internment camps that she kept and were held. There's a book about that. Those are not under open copyright as well.
In other words, it's complicated.
It's complicated, yeah. Her work, particularly her work. But if it's held by if it's held by a U.S. federal collection, in theory, it is copyrighted. I don't know. Tomorrow that might change, but hopefully not. So,
Thank you.
yeah.